The first time I realized my son was embarrassed by my voice, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted. It happened quietly, in a cafe filled with polite laughter and clinking cups. "Mom," he said with a tight smile, "it's receipt, not recit." He said it loudly enough for others to hear. Loud enough that it felt intentional. I was 72 years old, sitting across from my only child, holding a cup of coffee I didn't even want. He had insisted on meeting his co-workers. Said it would be nice. That word used to mean warmth, pride, connection. Now it meant performance. A few people smiled awkwardly. One woman avoided my eyes. Daniel leaned back, relaxed, confident, correcting me again when I asked for sugar. He didn't look at me while he did it. He looked at them. I nodded. I always nodded. Silence had kept me safe my whole life. Silence fed my child. Silence paid rent. Silence survived. My accent never bothered me before. It arrived with me decades earlier, when I crossed an ocean with one suitcase, a baby on my hip, and a husband who promised he'd follow. He never did. I worked wherever hands were needed. Kitchens. Factories. Offices cleaned after midnight. English came to me the hard way, mistake by mistake, humiliation by humiliation. But it worked. It kept the lights on. It raised my son. When Daniel was young, he never mocked me. He used to translate proudly, standing tall beside me like my protector. Somewhere between childhood and college, that pride turned into discomfort. And discomfort turned into distance. That day in the cafe, he corrected my grammar twice more. When I mispronounced a street name, he laughed. "You've lived here 40 years, he said. "How do you still talk like this?" I wanted to explain that accents don't disappear just because time passes. That my mouth remembered who I was before survival hardened me. But I didn't say it. I smiled into my coffee. Outside, he told me I should practice more before speaking to people. As if my voice needed permission. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd signed forms for him without question. I told myself he was stressed. That children say foolish things. That patience is a mother's job. What I didn't know was this: the very thing he mocked would soon be the reason strangers listened to me more carefully than they ever listened to him. And that silence, once learned, can be unlearned. Daniel didn't start by mocking me. He started by editing me. At first, it sounded helpful. He finished my sentences, corrected small words, smiled while doing it. But his jaw was always tight. Then came the rules. "Don't talk about work," he said before dinners with his friends. "Don't tell immigration stories. And please, Mom, no jokes. They don't always land." I nodded every time. Nodding became my second language. Soon he spoke for me at appointments. At banks. On the phone. "She means," he'd interrupt before I finished. When strangers tried to speak directly to me, he shifted uncomfortably, answering for me anyway. I let him. It felt easier than watching irritation cross his face every time I opened my mouth. By the time I was 70, I had learned how to take up very little space. Speak softly. Smile quickly. Apologize without words. Daniel, meanwhile, grew larger. Better job. Better apartment. Better voice. He learned how to polish his past when telling stories, how to say we didn't have much like it was temporary, not built on someone else's exhaustion. He never mentioned the nights I scrubbed floors, or the mornings I left before dawn, or the accent that paid for his education. When paperwork appeared, he brought it to me neatly stacked, already marked. "Just sign here, Mom." I asked what it was once. He sighed. "It's boring stuff. You wouldn't want to deal with it." So I signed. Because trust is easier than conflict. Because he was my son. I didn't notice when mail stopped reaching my hands. When calls were answered before I could speak. When officials were told I didn't really understand. What I did notice was how afraid he became whenever someone tried to listen to me. That fear didn't make sense. Not yet. The argument happened at my kitchen table, late at night. Daniel was tense before he even sat down. Papers scattered. Phone buzzing. Something had gone wrong. When I reached for a document, he snapped it back. "You don't need to read that." My name is on it, I said. He laughed, sharp, humorless. Your accent scares people, he said. Every time you speak, officials slow down. They ask questions. You make things complicated. I stared at him. I know what I sign. That's not the point, he snapped. You don't sound like you do. There it was. Clean. Honest. Ugly. For the first time, I didn't cry. I felt tired. Ancient. I told him my accent came from nights he slept through. From fear. From survival. That it wasn't a flaw, it was evidence. He rolled his eyes. You're being dramatic. That word ended something inside me. Just sign what I give you, he said. And don't talk to anyone official unless I'm there. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and spoke my name aloud, slowly, clearly, with my accent fully present. I sounded real. And I realized something dangerous. If my voice frightened him this much, it was because somewhere it carried a truth he couldn't control. After that night, I stopped signing. Daniel didn't expect resistance. When I asked for time, he stared at me like I'd spoken a new language. You're overthinking, he said. No, irraplia. I'm thinking. Letters began arriving addressed directly to me. I read them slowly, with a dictionary beside me, the way I once read school notices when Daniel was small. Nothing screamed. But nothing was clean. When officials called, they spoke to me directly. Asked if I understood. Waited for my answers. I did. Daniel panicked. Showed up unannounced. Corrected my phrasing mid-sentence. Told me people like me were targets. People like me? I asked. He didn't answer. When the visit was scheduled, he insisted on being there. Don't talk, he said. Let me explain. I didn't argue. I had already decided something he wasn't ready to hear. The officers arrived exactly on time. They greeted me first. Used my full name. Daniel stepped forward immediately. I'll handle this. We're here to speak with your mother, one officer said calmly. For the first time in his life, Daniel's voice didn't take priority. They asked me questions. Simple ones. Then harder ones. Daniel interrupted. I'm not confused, I said quietly. The room changed. When they asked who the investigation concerned, the officer looked at Daniel. Not your mother. Daniel went silent. 3 days later, they returned. This time, they asked for him by name. As they escorted him out, he looked back at me, not angry, not betrayed, just stunned. Like he couldn't understand how my quiet voice had outweighed his perfect one. Life didn't collapse after Daniel was taken. It became quieter. I was asked to speak once more, not as a suspect, but as a witness. They said I was very clear. Clear. At 73, I learned dignity doesn't arrive with forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives with boundaries so firm they feel cruel to those who benefited from your silence. Daniel asked for help later. Asked me to sound confused. I refused. I won't disappear anymore, I told him. Now when I speak, I don't rush. I don't soften myself. If someone interrupts me, I wait, and continue. My accent never made me weak. It taught me patience, precision, endurance. And that was enough.